Good evening and welcome. Thank you for being here. I'm just really amazed that you guys have come back every night. That must mean you like it. Okay. I'm sad to tell you that tonight will be the last night. Pray for Ronnie. He's getting up at 3 a.m. to take off, and yeah, early start. I mean, I'd choose suicide, but then again, that's me. But something I want to mention is Ronnie's been talking about the virtual tour. We've been doing this, and if you've enjoyed what you've watched here, I strongly would encourage you to consider getting the online version, because I just watched it today, and it is really, really good. I mean, I was amazed the beauty of the scenes. When you have these drones going over and you can actually see things, and I mean, it's really well done, very professionally done. So if you are interested in that, you can talk to Robin. She's at the table out in the foyer, and she can tell you how much it costs and how you can get the online link. And basically, I guess you have to have a code to punch it in, So I told Ronnie, I said, why don't you give me the code, and then I'll offer it for half price this next week. But he didn't seem to be really enthusiastic about that. But no, I just basically say I don't like to promote something unless I think it's really good, and it's really, really well done. So I would highly recommend that to you. Anything else, of course, the books and the rest of the stuff, you can talk to Robin about, and she can tell you how to get a hold of those things. But I can tell you'd like it, because if you enjoyed what we've done this week, I guarantee you'll really, really enjoy the full virtual tour with the visuals are really, really, really good. Much better than we have on these projection screens. We're getting new cameras in, actually. We got the cameras, and then we had to wait 6 months to get the lenses for the new projectors. And now we're just waiting for the things that connect them up there to the ceiling. So something about a supply chain issue, I don't know. Taken a year to get something that usually you could get overnight. Anyway, so we apologize that, because usually the new ones will be much more clear, but I would recommend you look into getting the virtual tour that he offers. Anyway, let's start with prayer, and we'll turn it over to Ronnie and enjoy our last night together. Father, I thank you for just the time we've had, the things we've learned. I find even as many times as I've been to Israel, I've been learning things throughout this whole week, Lord. I just thank you for that, Lord, that we might grow in understanding and knowledge. We know that it translates, Lord, when we understand the context and the historical and geographical context of which the Bible took place. It just opens our eyes to new vistas and new understanding. So we just pray your blessing upon Ronnie. I pray you bless him and his wife Tally tomorrow as they head off, that we pray for safety, that they would be able to get to their next destination in an efficient and comfortable way, Lord, and refresh their souls. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Ronnie, it's all yours.
Thank you, Ken. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad that you're back. And as I said yesterday, we covered quite a lot already. Today we're going to bring that to conclusion. I do want to thank Pastor Ken once again, and Jamie, obviously. They opened their home to us, and they're so kind to us. And this is always coming to Spokane, really coming home among friends. And just wanted to say that as well, okay? It doesn't belong to the tour. It's my tour over here. And always have friends in the area and a nice place to go to. Ladies and gentlemen, we started yesterday with Jerusalem. We had a short introduction about the city, and then we walked down a very steep hill called the Mount of Olives. We visited the Garden of Gethsemane. We walked into the old city of Jerusalem, walked the way of the cross. We saw some parts of the Jewish quarter, and then we left the city through Zion Gate to go to the upper room, and that's what brought day 6 to an end. So we're going to pick up the tour on day number 7, which is the second day in Jerusalem. And we're going to complement all the important sites in what we can call biblical Jerusalem and add to what we saw yesterday. So today, as you see on the screens over there, we are going to go to the city of David. That's where the story begins. When you go to visit Jerusalem, you go to the city of David. This is the oldest part of town. This is the town of Melchizedek. It's the town of the Jebusites, the city of David. It was basically the very heart of Jerusalem for a long time, as this was the center of government in David's palace and Solomon's palace, and I'll show you what was found in the area. Then we're going to climb back towards Temple Mount after we visit the pool of Siloam, and we are going to see the excavations around the western wall, and then up to Temple Mount. Temple Mount is one of those centers of a lot of tension, always is, and to try to film on top of Temple Mount when the guards are watching carefully what is it that you're doing is not very easy. But Temple Mount is basically the heart of everything. Everything that happens in Israel, Jerusalem, some will say around the world, is somehow connected to Temple Mount. Because once you speak about Israel as a holy land, you mean Jerusalem. And once you mention Jerusalem, you mean Mount Moriah. And when you mean Mount Moriah, you mean one rock, the very top of Mount Moriah. That's where the Holy of the Holies of the temple used to stand. It's all about one location, and we're going to dedicate some time to explain that. And then we're going to visit the Western Wall, which is the holiest place for the Jewish people, and that will bring day number 7 to conclusion. Day number 8 will speak about the modern city of Jerusalem, and we'll see some of the main institutions in the new city, bringing everything to conclusion, visiting Mount Moriah, Mount Moriah, the Garden Tomb, and to speak about the crucifixion, the tomb, the resurrection, and the tour will be basically over. Well, let's start with a map once again to show you what is it that we are going to see today. And we are going to start with the map as always, because once you understand your bearings in the area, it makes things easier to understand. The blue line over there is the one that we covered yesterday. Here comes the plan for today, which will be marked in red, and that will be our plan for today. We're going to go in from the Jaffa Gate area. We're going to make our way down to the city of David, and then from the pool of Siloam, we'll climb up to see the excavations outside the western wall, and then, of course, to Temple Mount. I do want to use the model that we used yesterday as well in order to give you a visual understanding of some parts of town. Today, the city of David is outside the city walls. But the city walls of today were built in the 16th century. Back in the days of Jesus, city of David was within the walls because the city walls went like that, encompassing this area, which is the southern slope of all of Mount Moriah. So although today the city of David is outside the city walls, these walls are 16th century. Please consider that we are walking inside the walls of the city on the way to the city of David. And here will be an idea how the city of David used to look like, just an impression. Number one, not a very large area. This whole thing is not that big as you understand. Sandwiched between the Kidron Valley on one side and the Central Valley on the other side. You see the walls of the city over there. I even marked Hezekiah's tunnel that we're going to speak about later on. And basically, you see the city the way it used to look like in the days of Solomon, because this will be the location for the temple, and this is within the walls already, and David was not the one who built the temple, that was Solomon. So that will be the city of David, as we mentioned many times, maybe 1,500, maybe 2,000 people at the most, not a large place. But that was the capital of Jerusalem for a long time, and only later on the city will start growing when they learn how to carry water from place to place. Let's start with a short video, and some of what you're going to hear I mentioned yesterday, but I was told that people prefer to hear stuff more than once. There are better chances that some of it will stick. Before we do that, it's an opportunity to point at the wall that you see in front of you, and then to point at this one as well. Very unusual, you can be so specific about what time in history we are looking at. I can tell you this, when King David, still a king over one tribe in Israel, king in Hebron for 7.5 years, after the death of Saul's son, Ishbosheth, David was invited by the elders of Israel to be king over the whole nation. And he's asking God, what shall I do? And God says, you go and you conquer Jebus. So David leaves Hebron, and he's coming to the foot of this wall right here. And think about this young man standing here looking at the mighty wall of Jebus, thinking to himself, how on earth we're going to conquer this place? And the Bible tells us the Jebusites are standing on top of the wall, looking down at David and go like, na, 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 na. They said, our city is so mighty that even the blind and the lame can protect it. No way you're going to conquer the city. Some of you may recall how the city was taken. It was Joab, David's mighty general and nephew, that climbed the water shaft and conquered the city from within. So speaking about the days of David and predating David, that would be the wall of Jebus. And you see, it's not a vertical wall, it has like a slope, which means that you can climb it. And the question is, why build a wall with a slope to make the enemy's job easier? It doesn't make any sense, except for one thing. The idea is that if you have designed this wall on a slope and you're standing right on top, you can also see the bottom of it when you are behind shelter. Let me explain. If the wall was vertical and you want to see the bottom, half of your body is exposed. You're vulnerable. There's no way to protect yourself if you want to cover the bottom with fire, with boiled oil, with whatever. If you do that in a slope, you may take a chance that the enemy will be easier to climb. But then you can cover the bottom with fire while taking shelter behind a wall as well. It's a very interesting mindset to think that people were that sophisticated back at the time, but that's why the wall of Jebus was built not as a vertical wall, but as a slope, and you can see almost like stairs that you can climb. This corner is very intriguing, because this corner is of different shape, different style. You're looking at the only one piece of wall in Jerusalem that we can connect easy to Nehemiah. The Bible tells us that when Nehemiah came back to Jerusalem, he was a Persian official, to remind you, and he was sent over with the blessing of the king himself. He wanted to rebuild the walls of the city. So he was mounted on his mule or horse and rode around, and he said that the ruins of Jerusalem that the Babylonians left behind was so massive that we had to design a new path to the wall. We could not clear everything and build the old wall from the city of David. And the Bible tells us it took 52 days. He divided people into groups, and every family erected a section of the wall. And lo and behold, you can actually see how that happened. So this section of the wall is from the days of Nehemiah, building not down here as he was supposed to do, because this was too much in ruins. He was the one that added another layer. We speak about layers once again. So when you look at the walls of Jerusalem, that will take us back predating David, and that section was built in the days of Nehemiah and went around the city. Well, let's start with this and see if it rings a bell. Well, something should happen, and nothing happens. Is it? Yeah, I'm sorry. Something happens. Amazing, huh?
City of David, as small as it is, was excavated more than any other place on the planet. You do understand the curiosity, and once the Ottoman Empire was more willing to accommodate Western European delegations, and there was a growing involvement of Europe in Ottoman affairs, Jerusalem was an opportunity. And for that reason, team after team and scholar after scholar came to excavate the city. And sometimes too many details are adding confusion and not clarity necessarily. But Jerusalem has a history which is much longer than what we only told in the Bible. When they did excavations in the area, and when they looked at some other documents, most of them come from Egypt. The place was mentioned. In the 19th century BCE, there was a tradition among the Egyptian army, before they go to battle, to write the name of the enemy on small clay figurines and smash it down to the ground, hoping that this will happen to the enemy in the battlefield. Lo and behold, the name of Jerusalem was found, which meant that Jerusalem was important enough for the Egyptian pharaohs to pay attention to, and at least once the Egyptian army was marching up to Jerusalem to conquer the city. Now, the city is not a place of strategic significance. It's not on the main highways. It's away from the trade routes or the coast. So the question was, what was so important about Jerusalem? And sometimes we have to say, we're not really sure about why the Egyptians paid that much attention to conquer the place. We are given another opportunity to think about the importance of it in the letters of El Amarna. The entire archive of the Egyptian Foreign Office from the 14th century BCE was found in a place called El Amarna in Egypt. 381 clay tablets, Pharaoh is corresponding and writing to the kings that were under his authority, and one was the king of Jerusalem. So we know that Jerusalem had professional diplomats. We know that Jerusalem was important to the Egyptians, and all that is preceding the conquest in the days of Joshua. We are told in the book of Joshua, chapter 12, 31 cities Joshua conquered. Jerusalem was one of them. True, it was called Salem back then and not Jerusalem. We know that Melchizedek was king in this area. We also know that the tribe of Judah conquered the place. You go to Judges number 1. But we also know that the place remained in the hands of the local Jebusites. And that's confusing. The Bible said that the place was conquered by the tribe of Judah. So how come we find it in the hands of Jebus and David has to reconquer it? Let me make a suggestion here.
Well, I did make the suggestion yesterday, and I don't want to repeat the whole thing. We spoke about conquerors as opposed to inhabit a certain location. So we tried to solve that dilemma. I do want to mention one of the tablets of El Amarna, which is fascinating, and try to follow some of the Hebrew that I'm going to use. The king of Jerusalem, a man by the name of Abdi Hepa, the name is not important, is sending a letter to Pharaoh, and he's complaining. He says that his city is attacked by the Habirus, Hebrews. Doesn't my master care that his city is in danger? Some scholars do believe that what we read about is the book of Joshua, basically. This nation of the Hebrews is approaching my city. It's a mighty nation. They conquered the whole country. I am next. Please come to the rescue. So to mention the name Hebrews, you do understand how important that document is. Maybe we have one evidence archaeologically that speaks about like breaking news. The attack is about to happen. The Hebrews are storming my city. Send help. If this is indeed the connection of the Habirus or the Hebrews, we do have a fascinating document that basically speaks about the attack of Jerusalem in the days of Joshua by the Hebrews. It's a possibility. The other thing that we need to speak about the city of David is to show you how it used to look like in relation to Mount Moriah. This will be purchased by David for Solomon to build a temple. So that will happen only later on. And we saw this picture. So let me move forward to show you one other thing. In the excavations, they found a bundle of seals, 51 of them. Each one has a name on it. These are the names of officials in the court of the king, some of which we know from the Bible. So think about the possibility that we speak about Jewish Hebrew diplomats, that each one had a little insignia that he was carrying on his ring, and whenever you wanted to send a document to somebody, you fold the scroll and you drip some wax on it and you seal the document with your insignia. Well, the scrolls were not found because of the fire that devastated the whole city, but these were found. So we do have 51 names, 32 of them. We can prove from the scriptures officials in the king's court, from the days of David and on, from the days of Jeremiah, for example. So this is quite amazing, and for that reason, scholars do believe that where these were found, someplace around here, that was indeed the palace, that was indeed the government center, and this is also on top of the city. And since the city is situated on a very steep slope, that may explain how was David able to see Bathsheba bathing on the roof. Some of you may wonder, how was that possible? Well, if the palace is located on the very top of town, as now we can prove with these documents, you can see every rooftop down below you. And one afternoon, David saw Bathsheba bathing on the rooftop. So that's how that was possible. You're standing there and you have an aha moment. Oh, of course it is. You can see every rooftop down below you. So we can point almost beyond any doubt to say that the palace of David was indeed found. Now we do know that David's palace was built by the Phoenicians. The first king that recognized David as king was Hiram, the king of Tyre. And part of that recognition was also to send his architects because the Israelites did not master the skills of architecture yet. They did not know how to build palaces. And David's palace was not that fancy. And for that reason, we speak about the first international, if you wish, relationship of the Israelites with the king of the Sidonians. And that treaty will go on for a long time. So we do speak about David is integrating the kingdom, make Jerusalem a capital to be the center of the tribes of Israel on the mountaintop. And also, Jebus was the only enclave of non-Israelites on the mountains. The whole area was taken by the tribes of Israel. They only left one place not conquered, Jebus. So if you want to unite the tribes, literally speaking, without leaving any buffer for the enemy in the very heart of the territory, you must take Jebus. Maybe that was one of the reasons why God ordered David very clearly, you go and conquer the one place that may present a strategic threat for the unity of the tribes of Israel. So Jebus was taken. It was called Jerusalem or the city of David. And let's carry on and listen to this.
It's not easy to be impressed today when you see basically ruins. But you can't get any closer to what the Bible tells us than to look at those ruins in front of you. That's how the prophet Isaiah delivered his prophecies, and that's how the prophet Jeremiah gave his messages. Almost everything that the Bible tells us when we speak about the days of the Old Testament, let alone the kingdom of Judah, took place in Jerusalem. And those stones in front of you have an amazing story to tell. It was either an indication that the standard of living was higher than average. A stone was found over there with a hole in it. You can easily guess what that stone was for. You're absolutely right, lavatories. Think about people having a sense of hygiene more than 2,500 years ago and how important that was. But it teaches us something else. They checked the waste outside to try to see what kind of foods people ate in Jerusalem back then. And lo and behold, they found a lot of fish bones. Now, Jerusalem is quite away from the Mediterranean Sea. So that must indicate a rich trade that the city was engaged in. We do know from the book of Nehemiah, centuries later on, that Nehemiah had to battle the Phoenician merchants. They came from the sea to do business on the Sabbath day outside the walls of Jerusalem. So that was long before that. But the fact that the city is away from the sea, once you proclaim it as capital, and you make it a metropolis that will have its political significance and a commercial one as well, you can identify by looking at the local ceramics and by even trying to figure out what people ate in the area. It will tell you a lot about how rich was the trade between Jerusalem and the whole region.
I don't want to offend any archaeologists, but usually what they do, they are looking through ancient civilizations' garbage. That's what they do. Things of value, nobody will get rid of. So very rarely they'll find things of value like coins or golden. What they find is everything that people did not want and got rid of it, including garbage. What a job to have, huh? Looking through people's garbage. But think about what you are toasting away and how much people will be able to tell about your life in 500 years just going through your garbage. And therefore, to have the details, I don't mean to be gross, okay? But to have the details of daily life, that's what they do. So to be able to find a stone with a hole in it, knowing very well what it was for, and check the waste under it, that will tell you something about the standard of living, about what food people ate, and if it's not found in the area, it indicates trade. And therefore, the more you dig, the more you find those pieces, you add another piece to the puzzle in order to get closer and closer to understand what was life like in the city. Water was always a big challenge, and we do speak about the water reservoir of Jerusalem. And for that, we have to go into the bedrock today because people live in the city of David. I told you yesterday, in order to excavate, you have to go under living quarters. And we have the rare opportunity today to follow the path of the ancient Canaanites, maybe to the days of Melchizedek, definitely Joab that climbed that very shaft to conquer the city, because everything was connected to water, basically. And therefore, we speak about a project that was quite amazing. And when we speak about Hezekiah's tunnel in just a minute, you'll see what great skills of water engineering people had back then.
Water, so trivial to most of us. Well, the biggest challenge in the ancient days, especially in an arid area like Israel or Jerusalem. True, we have about 20 to 25 inches of rainfall every year, but back in the old days, people did not know how to collect rainwater, how to build aqueducts. You were dependent on the spring, literally on the spring. And therefore, you have to live within a decent walking distance and go daily down to the water source to collect water to go back home. And by the way, since water was so precious, there was a water commissioner. You don't just go down for yourself and take as much water as you want. There was some kind of rationing. You only take what you need. Here in Jerusalem, the one and only water source is a spring of Gihon or Gihon. Annual flow, about 500,000 cubic meters of water, and that will be hardly enough to sustain a community of about 1,500 people at the most. It wasn't just taking water home to wash or to do your laundry, it was also for irrigation, industry. And therefore, water was the main thing to consider. It was indeed a source of life. So no wonder why the most important political act of a king's life, his anointment and his coronation, will take place by the spring, the source of life. The Bible tells us when David was on his deathbed, they took his young son Solomon, mounted on David's mule, and led him down to the spring, and he was anointed by the spring. Yes, we do speak about maybes and most likelies and traditional places. No tradition about that. I can tell you beyond any doubt that Solomon was coming down that way, and that's where the priest Zadok anointed him to be king, right here. How exciting it is to be able to say 3,000 years later, we know not just the general area, we know the very place. And therefore, to go down to the water source, the spring of Gihon, you're going back down to the source of life, to the city. Without this spring, there was no Jerusalem. For a long time, that was the one and only water source, and the city could not grow beyond the annual flow of it until people learned how to collect rainwater, how to dig cisterns, how to collect flash flood water, and then the city can start growing.
Well, that will be the entrance also to what will be called later on Hezekiah's tunnel. I do have that little sketch over here that shows the spring and then the tunnel that carried water to the pool of Siloam. Let me tell you about the circumstances under which Hezekiah dug his tunnel. Hezekiah was king and started ruling 727 BC as a vassal of the Assyrians. And after the king of Assyria, Sargon II, died, Hezekiah thought it's an opportunity to rebel against Assyria. It will turn out to be a big mistake, but the Bible tells us that he was the chief leader that was able to form a coalition of local countries trying to free themselves from Assyria. It was indeed a mistake, because after a short civil war within Assyria, a young prince by the name of Sennacherib had prevailed, and he took a campaign to punish all those rebels, including King Hezekiah. We have a document that was found in the palace of Sennacherib in Nineveh in Assyria. And that document says the following: I attacked the kingdom of Hezekiah the Judean. I conquered 46 cities and locked him like a bird in his capital, Jerusalem. So if we need to try to find from the scriptures some other sources to verify even the political acts, that will be the one. So when the Bible speaks about Hezekiah, who was one of the great kings in Judah, no doubt, the Bible doesn't tell us in too many details that Hezekiah brought a disaster to the kingdom, including 200,000 people were exiled by the Assyrians to Assyria. Jerusalem was not conquered. The prophet Isaiah promised the king, fear not, it's not your problem. Jerusalem is safe. Indeed, Jerusalem was not taken. But since Hezekiah knew that the Assyrian army is coming, he had to prepare the city, and the city was not prepared for war. Number one, protect your water source. And therefore, Hezekiah's men simply camouflaged the spring and were digging a tunnel under the city. That means that you are digging from both ends. Two parties are digging under about 200 feet of bedrock and meet halfway. How did they do that? You do understand the problem, because if you miss, you get two tunnels for the price of one. And it wasn't just the right and left. What about the up and down? So yes, we give lots of credit to the Romans and their ingenuity. 700 years before the Roman days in Judea, we speak about master water engineers. We just do not understand how it was done, but it was done. And when you read the data about how careful they were and what was the accomplishment, it makes you really appreciate the skills of these people. For example, the slope of the canal, of the tunnel, was 0.06 degrees. How do you reach that? The Romans were able to do 0.1. In this case, it's very, very gentle. So teams are working for both ends under the pressure of the approaching Assyrian army, and they chisel through the rock, and the chief engineer, no doubt, is watching carefully what is it that they're doing. Only one mistake along the way that they corrected 2 feet later, and bang, they meet, just before the Assyrian army arrives. And the Bible speaks about that project as well. But when you think about those little details, it's absolutely amazing. As a crow flies from spring to the pool, which was the destination of it, I'll use the metric system, okay? 330 meters. But in order to create that slope, they designed a path which is 551 meters and 10 centimeters just to make sure that you maintain the 0.06. How did they do that? Today, scholars just scratching their heads to say, well, these guys knew what they were doing. So this is an amazing project, and the city survived. And the reason was the water source was secured. So Hezekiah's tunnel is one of the great accomplishments that you can see in Jerusalem until this very day. And you see the path, right? It starts over here, goes under the city. That's where they met the two teams basically. And you see another part over here. Well, I was a little adventurous that day, I have to say, and especially to show you this.
Walking through Hezekiah's tunnel is always an amazing experience. You see the ceiling is about 15 feet above me, and look how narrow is the tunnel. Getting closer now to the exit, water flows very slowly from the spring, which is about 600 yards away from here, to fill up the pool. There is daylight.
The water is freezing cold, by the way.
And right here, they found in 1880 an inscription that describes the moment that the two teams met. It was not the meeting point, but that's where they built that. The question is why? It's so hidden. Nobody will see that. If you want to glorify the builders for the major effort, you should do that in a public place. But they did not. It was carved out, broken in the process, and now it's in the museum in Istanbul in Turkey. Keep heading out. We'll get to the exit in just a minute. What an adventure to be able to walk through a tunnel that was dug by King Hezekiah to protect the city water source 2,700 years ago.
So basically the tunnel was carrying water from the spring under the city into a new reservoir that was the pool of Siloam, just the data I mentioned to you earlier, in order to really appreciate what a great accomplishment that was. The pool of Siloam will be the main water reservoir for Jerusalem from the days of King Hezekiah. The Bible speaks about it also in the Gospel of John chapter 9, because Jesus sent the blind man from the temple's area to go down to the pool of Siloam. And as you all remember, right, he had some mud on his face, and he washed the mud from his face so he could see. When it was built, it was meant to have drinking water. In the Roman days, it was no longer a water reservoir to drink water. The Romans knew better. You do not drink water from open pools. It's not clear, it's not clean. They'll drink water from cisterns or wells or springs, but not from open pools. So you have a large reservoir of water. What would you do with it? Well, laundry, irrigation, industry, and also a massive cleansing facility for the Jewish pilgrims that came up to Jerusalem. So in the days of Jesus, the pool of Siloam was no longer a drinking water source. We speak about a big water source, but it was used for different things. I do want to take a sidetrack with your permission for just a minute. Purity is a major issue in the Jewish way of life until this very day. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us much about what does it mean to be desecrated, what will impure a person, and how do you purify yourself. The Bible only speaks about the necessity of cleansing somebody that was defiled in a way. Well, for that reason, we have the commentators to fill up those missing pieces. What does it mean? You go to Leviticus 14, the Bible speaks about the necessity to purify somebody. Well, how do you do that? You go to the ocean, you go to the spring, you go to the river. Maybe you use some sand and not water necessarily, as it is in Islam, by the way. So the Bible is not specific. But in the days of Jesus, the days of the Second Temple, when the Jewish rabbinical commentaries are taking a very important part in daily practice, The idea was that it has to be a water container, which is filled with water that was filled naturally and not manually. Which means the whole city was designed to be a catchment area to carry rainwater from the rooftops and the courtyards and the streets to fill in drinking water systems, but also those cleansing facilities to make them kosher. We call those a mikveh. A mikveh is a cleansing facility, basically. So the whole of the pool of Siloam, all of it, will be basically a large cleansing facility for the hundreds of thousands of pilgrims that came to Jerusalem. Before you get to the temple, you have to bring yourself up to the highest level of purity. You go to a cleansing facility, and only then, being very careful not to touch any unclean object, you are permitted to proceed and go into the temple.
15 years ago or so, as always by sheer chance, an amazing discovery was made. This was a public road where we're standing right now, and they had to do some constructions in the area, and while removing the road, they discovered the pool of Siloam. For centuries upon centuries, people were looking to a totally different location, claiming that this is the pool of Siloam. That was a wrong identification. This is the one. Some of the stairs that you see here were built in the days of King Hezekiah. That to be the main water reservoir at the destination to the tunnel he was digging. And some of it was built in the days of Herod the Great. Well, the question is, what was it for? In the days of Hezekiah, no doubt, that was a drinking water reservoir that Hezekiah specially made to protect the spring from the hands of the enemy. But the Romans knew better than this. The Romans did not drink water from open pools. They knew this is not healthy for you. You'll have some algae, some dirt in it. And therefore, in the Roman days, they were using those pools for irrigation, for laundry, and all kinds of industry. But it's possible also that that was the largest mikveh in the world. We'll speak about the cleansing facility. When you think about the masses coming to Jerusalem for the holidays, and Josephus Flavius mentions to us that one Passover, they offered 250,000 lambs. That's a lamb for a family. We speak about millions. Everybody was on the way to the temple. And before you go to the temple, you have to cleanse yourself. And the temple did not have that many facilities. So possible, as some scholars believe, that the pool of Siloam, in the days of Jesus, in the days of the second temple, was no longer a drinking water reservoir, but it was basically a gigantic mikveh.
Let me also make a suggestion that in Pentecost Day, when the Bible said that 3,000 people were baptized in one afternoon, where do you think would that be? What was the largest mikveh in the city? Where were the cleansing facilities? It's definitely possible that these 3,000 people came from the area of the upper room and went straight down to the pool of Siloam for their baptism. It's a possibility. There's no way to prove that, but where else can you accommodate such a large number of people in a short time? So you can make that connection that maybe that was the mikveh or the cleansing facility. That's where the 3,000 people were baptized that Pentecost Day afternoon. We carry on with our virtual tour, and we are walking now from the city of David and going up closer to the temple area on our way to Temple Mount. And this is going to be the other part of the city that we are going to visit today, around Temple Mount and on top of Temple Mount. So let me run, just a blank slide, interesting. So this is from the model that we are using every now and then. This was the pool of Siloam, and this will be the city of David, and that will be the southern wall of Temple Mount. And people basically were walking, the pilgrims, from the pool of Siloam as they are ready, excited, on the way to the temple. That will be the path to take. But the pilgrims who came to Jerusalem would enter through one set of gates only. The temple itself had 8 gates. Most of them were simply to divide the pressure if anybody came to the temple for the daily business. And keep in mind, the Bible tells us, money changers, a big marketplace over there. If you came as a pilgrim, and that was the purpose of your visit, you always enter from south. And there was one main reason. Everything around Jerusalem was higher. So if you approach a temple, the place of your pilgrimage, you don't want to go down the hill to the holy place. It's inappropriate. You want to climb, your face lifted. That's how you approach the house of God. The only side that you're actually climbing is coming from south, which means you could come from every corner of the world, everybody will get together by the pool of Siloam and will climb from south to access the temple through these two gates that you see in front of you. And these were excavated, and it's quite amazing to see that part of the excavations.
Herod the Great was king for almost 20 years when he felt strong enough and wealthy enough to ask permission from the Jewish elders, the Sanhedrin, to renovate the temple's area. What was his motivation? Well, Josephus Flavius, the historian that tells us about those eras, will speak about the money issue, will speak about Herod's motivation to be recognized as the head of the whole Jewish people, not just king of Judea. And you need to know that even back then, about half of the Jewish people did not live in Judea. If you make Jerusalem so beautiful, if you build a structure that was something that nobody had ever seen in the country, that will maybe fortify your position as a leader of the Jews and not just the king of Judea.
Well, a lot of efforts were dedicated to build the Temple Mount, but again, to build just this huge platform and the temple on top without adequate infrastructure, basically you defeat your own purpose. Think about building a huge stadium without a single parking spot. And therefore, the Temple Mount was the most important part of the project. But with this thought in mind, Herod built the largest harbor in the world in Caesarea. We did speak about that. And think about the roads and the marketplaces and the cleansing facilities. Everything has changed as a result of Herod's effort to build the Temple Mount and all the infrastructure in the area. And that was quite amazing, because what stands there even today is absolutely stunning. Let me show you once again a picture from the model that we are going to visit in the next hour. You're looking at the largest man-made platform in the world that was ever built. It was built in Herod's days. It encompasses 36 acres in size, and the massive retaining walls around it are the walls of the Temple Mount. Until that project was built, we cannot speak about Temple Mount, we'll speak about Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah is the natural bedrock. Temple Mount is the man-made box that was built on top of Mount Moriah. And therefore, when David was king, there was no Temple Mount. Herod was the one that built Temple Mount that covers under it the bedrock of Mount Moriah, leaving just the mountaintop above the platform, because the mountaintop, that was the place of the Holy of Holies inside the temple. Tricky question, tricky question, tricky question. I'm offering 20,000 points for a correct answer. These points are good for nothing. What was in the Holy of Holies of Herod's temple? Thank you. Absolutely nothing. Not the Ark of the Covenant. We speak about a room with no object inside, filled with God's divine presence, the Shekinah glory. But there's no Ark of the Covenant, and no tablets, and no jar with manna, as it was in the first temple. So the Holy of Holies of the second temple, built by Zerubbabel, enlarged by Herod, was a room with no object inside. We read in the books of history that Pompey the Great laid siege around Jerusalem for 3 months, and after a terrible disaster, he goes into the temple, and he goes into the Holy of Holies, looks around and says, there's nothing here, and leaves the whole area. Well, that was the impression of the Romans, not understanding how significant was the place for the Jews. But just to give you that perspective as well. So Temple Mount is that man-made compound, and these walls are the retaining walls. And you see the facade of the building, and you see the Gentiles' court. That's where the money changers used to be. And there is a line here dividing the Jewish section from the non-Jewish section. If you were Jewish, then you could proceed closer to the temple, going through that line. Paul was arrested in Acts 7. They brought accusations against him that he brought a non-Jew into the limited Jewish area. But the Temple Mount was open to everybody. Keep in mind, when Solomon dedicates his temple, he's asking God, let no foreigner be rejected in this place. Isaiah calls the temple the house of prayer to all nations indeed. Some parts of the Temple Mount were open to everybody. So not only Jews came to the temple because the fame of the building spread it all around the Roman Empire. Roman historians, when they speak about Judea, they say the following. It's an amazing nation. 1 week, 1 day of the week, no work is being done, which means they're lazy. That's a Sabbath. There is a sea that nothing can sink in it, the Dead Sea, and a temple that does not contain a single statue. For the Roman mindset, that was amazing. How can you go to the temple without a statue? But the fame of the temple spread it all around the Roman Empire, and when you look at the structure, how magnificent it was, it begins to make more sense. If you read some of the data about the stones and about the whole structure, it's really puzzling, and we're not going to go into too many details, but the second largest stone in the world, 500 tons, is integrated in the western wall of the temple. So we speak about a massive project. Well, the Romans knew about cranes, they knew about pulleys and tripods. A Roman crane could lift 50 tons. We speak about 500, which means that 10 cranes had to work in concert, and if you want to lift a stone, you need to do that in the same tenth of a second, otherwise it won't move. So we speak about master builders, it's always makes you say, just look at that, it's absolutely amazing. Still standing, with all the problems in Jerusalem and the earthquakes, still standing. So we speak about a massive project and another great accomplishment. Let me just show you this because the details are not that important. And look at the level of precision.
One will have to
Here is
admire
one
the
stone,
level of
and here is
precision
another
that
stone.
those stonemasons did accomplish.
Here is one, here is the
And
other.
look at the stones, how well they stand one above the other. You can hardly tell where a stone ends and another one begins. You're also noticing there is no connecting material between those stones.
So let me try to explain how they accomplished that, and I'm apologizing for my poor drawing skills over there. But here is the problem. You have a steep mountainside, and you want to build a large man-made box around the mountain and cover it with a platform. How do you bridge the gap between the bedrock and the steep slope and the platform? Well, there are a few ways to do that, and let me try to demonstrate that to you while skipping one or two of these. I know it doesn't make a lot of sense, but please bear with me, okay? If you could see through the retaining walls of the temple, that's what you would see on the other side. The mountain is hollow. We have arches built one above the other, one next to the other, to accomplish that leveled area around the rock of Moriah. So you have the platform, retaining walls, but most of the mountain is hollow. And the question is why? It will be much easier to build the stone box, stuff it with dirt, tighten it to make a platform. Not quite. Because you noticed earlier that the stones were not connected with any connecting material. They were perfectly carved, totally leveled, resting one above the other. Why not using mortar and smaller stones? The Romans knew about concrete. It will make everything a lot easier. Well, the problem was that in order to produce mortar, you have to burn a lot of limestone. Judea doesn't have that amount of timber. Somebody figured out that to use smaller stones to build the retaining walls, you'll have to cut off a forest, which is 15 by 10 miles. The country doesn't have that amount of timber. So it left one option. Number one, level the bedrock to the best of your ability, because if the bedrock is not leveled, the whole structure will not be solid enough. And in the process of leveling the bedrock, Herod's engineers removed everything from Solomon's temple that was still there. The Romans are not building on ruins. That's the way that the ancient people used to do. The Romans will clear everything, will level the bedrock. So from Solomon's temple, we have absolutely nothing, not because it wasn't there, of course it was, because Herod's engineers removed everything to level the bedrock. And then you can start piling up those layers one above the other to accomplish that. So that's how it was built, to reduce the pressure from the retaining walls. There was another reason. The temple needed storage. We speak about living quarters. The priesthood, 24 divisions, every year, every division came to serve in the temple for 2 weeks. They lived on top of Temple Mount. So they need to have water systems. Think about the tithes and the offerings. Think about the sacrifices every day. You do not consume the whole meat at the same day. You need storage. And how do you store meat for a long time? You salt it. The Dead Sea was there, so the temple had the chambers of salt also to keep the meat and to offer the sacrifices. Every offering was offered with salt. That's what the Bible commands us to do. So this whole massive project had to be built in a certain way, considering the pressure on the walls, considering the needs for storage, but there was another reason, the most important one, purity once again. Try to follow what I'm trying to explain, okay? It's possible that long before the place was purchased by David, long before the days of Abraham, somebody was buried on the slopes of Mount Moriah. Is it possible? Possible, which means you have dead bones, the ultimate source of contamination under the temple that will defile the whole mountain. What are we going to do? The Bible is not addressing those issues at all. It is all commentary, rabbinical commentary. There is a problem. We need to find an answer. Listen to this. Dead bones which are buried someplace, all right, their impurity will only travel through solid rock, not through air. Why? Because that's what the rabbis decided. Which means if you have some air between the bedrock and possible dead bones and where the platform is at, it's kosher. I can show you in Jerusalem today as we speak, whole neighborhoods, that the buildings are built on columns because once upon a time it was an old burial place. So this is an issue that many people in my country are very concerned not to be defiled by dead bones. Cemeteries are very clearly marked, always outside the residential area. If you should see a Jewish funeral, it's not that pretty. We try to bury the deceased before the sun sets at the very same evening. We don't postpone that. Because once somebody died, the spirit is not in him anymore. We want to get rid of it as quickly as possible. So a Jewish funeral is sometimes not that pleasant to see. But we need to understand the concept behind that. So in order to do everything by a certain code, including key purity of people, Temple Mount was basically a hollow mountain. Retaining walls, platform, and huge hollow spaces behind. I hope that my great skills here convinced you how the place used to look like. And when they checked the stones, one above the other, they came to an amazing conclusion. How do you place them so well? How do you convey them from the quarry to the construction site? Because if you lower a stone and you misplace it, oops, you can't move it anymore. Well, there was a way. They scanned the retaining walls with infrared and ultrasound, and they found between every two large stones, one above the other, by the way, the smallest stone in the wall is 2.5 tons. They found between every two large stones many small pieces of lead. And that led them to the following idea. You place on top of every stone hundreds of these small pieces. You bring the next stone to the side. You lift it up with a crane. You slowly lower it. And as you place it on the lower stone, you can still move it right and left because it stands on bolts. And the heavy pressure of the next one will smash it. Was it indeed the case? Possible. I can only tell you that between every two large stones, they could track hundreds of small pieces of lead. So maybe that's how the whole project was completed, and that's how it was done. Access road to the temple was coming from south, as I mentioned earlier.
When you plan to build such a massive project like Temple Mount in Jerusalem, you need to also consider very carefully the infrastructure. There'll be no point to build a place that could accommodate hundreds of thousands of people unless you provide them decent roads and decent water reservoirs, and the temple had to have its own water system, and people need to be comfortable to walk up the mountains of Jerusalem, so you have to police the highways as well. It wasn't just the building. Maybe even the harbor in Caesarea was designed in order to accommodate more people and aspire to be the real center for the Jews around the world, because back in the days of Herod, the days of Jesus, about 50% of the Jewish population did not live in Judea. Yet many people came, and they came in the Jew times.
Well, you could hear me kind of catching my breath, huh? Not easy to climb those stairs, and I'm getting older, so please don't hold it against me. But you don't understand the massive staircase and those rivers of people flowing up to go up into the temple. That's what you should see. And think about Mary and Joseph bringing baby Jesus, just born in Bethlehem, all the way to the temple. And a woman stands on the stairs. Her name is Hannah from the tribe of Asher, and she approaches them and recognizes baby Jesus as the Messiah. What a moment would that be? And that's where many years later Peter was preaching and teaching the crowd. That was Hyde Park, if you wish, or Speaker's Corner in London of the old days. Everything happened on the stairs of the temple, going in and out from that structure. And if you want to go to the top of the Temple Mount, well, today you have to take a little detour, because today you can no longer use those staircases or to use the gates which are closed. So we're going to make a little detour and climb up to Temple Mount. On top of Temple Mount today, we have two main buildings. The place is in Muslim hands from the 7th century. Palestine was conquered by Islam 636 to 638. And for some reason, I'm not being kind of facetious here, they chose Jerusalem to be a holy place to Islam. I'm saying that because Jerusalem is not mentioned in the Quran, not even once. There was no connection between Jerusalem and the Muslim holy scriptures, as they call them, with the Quran. So the question is, how come? Jerusalem is the third holiest location for the Muslim world in the world today. Well, again, we speak about traditions, we speak about historical circumstances. I'm just giving you a simple fact. The name Jerusalem is not in the Quran. They believe that when Muhammad had ascended, and the Quran teaches that he was taken by Allah to the most remote area, they decided that the most remote area is not Spokane, Washington, but Jerusalem. They could have decided any other location. Why choose Jerusalem? Again, we're not going because it will take a long time to explain. It's just a fact. And therefore, for the last 1,300 years, Temple Mount is in Muslim hands. Jews have no access to it. And think about the frustrating situation in a sovereign Jewish state, in a sovereign Jewish capital. The holiest place for the Jewish people, Temple Mount, is not even accessible for Jews to practice. It's in Muslim hands. And if you wonder why, to make it very short, democracy. We respect the centuries of other religions. We would like to try to draw closer to the Muslim world, and one way to do that is to give them the right to practice on top of Temple Mount. And many people say, well, on God's timing. We always aspire to go back. We should not take action. We don't know the timing. We should wait patiently until God will decide to do that. It may happen right now, or maybe we'll have to wait for a few more years. That will be the approach of most people in the Jewish world vis-a-vis Temple Mount. So we have an alternative, which is the Western Wall. But the Western Wall is second best. We aspire to go back to Temple Mount. But because of the political controversy and the religious one, most likely not really going to happen. We don't have that much time left, so let me try to show you what will be a visit to Temple Mount like.
Accessing Temple Mount, that's the only entrance for non-Muslims. Other gates are only open for Muslims to come through. And this is the time for visitors. A total separation between the Muslim worshippers that come to worship and tourists that come to view. Interesting angle from here, we can see the Western Wall Prayer Plaza, which is down below us. Always people by the Western Wall, always people praying. It's divided now to these little cloisters because of the Corona days, but there's always somebody by the Western Wall. It's a Sunday today, so it's not a Bar Mitzvah day. It won't be as busy as usual, and the Western Wall is right in front of you. If we look to the other side, we'll be able to see some of the excavations which are outside the Western Wall. No, blocked right now. We're going to go through into the Western Wall area. Boker tov, boker tov. Entering Temple Mount. Boker tov.
Everybody's watching you with some suspicion. Guards are coming to check. What are you doing with the camera? Nobody around. Look at that. There's nobody around.
Show up these days. But this is by far the most important place on the planet for so many people.
I need to have the appropriate music.
Heavy police presence, always. The Muslim guards are maintaining law and order among the Muslims, but their authority is really limited. Police is heavily invested on top of Temple Mount. All Israelis, by the way, to remind you, there was some confusion about who owns Temple Mount. But let me remind you, Israel is the sovereign.
I'm stopping here for a minute to ask you, if you could see through the floor, what would you see down below? Arches, right? It's all hollow, remember? Everything is resting on these huge arches. I do want to run this one through and to try to solve the $64,000 question about where exactly on top of Temple Mount the temple was standing. There's more than one option. I'm telling you right away, I'm going to take 3 more minutes from your precious time before this session will come to an end. Well, here are a couple of possibilities. I did mention to you that when you speak about the holy cow, you mean something biblical. The red heifer, the holy cow, was prepared by the high priest assistant to use the ashes of it to purify the people. That was the ultimate source of purification, and whenever they ran low on ashes, they had to burn another cow, and for that reason, an altar was built on Mount of Olives. Now, the Jewish books or the Jewish Mishnah says the following. When the high priest assistant was burning the red heifer, from that location of the altar, he could see above the eastern gate of the temple and through the temple gates, which means that the altar for the red heifer, the eastern gate, and the temple should be on one line. It's very clearly stated. Well, the problem is we only have the eastern gate in the right location. We do not know where the temple was standing, or where exactly on top of Mount of Olives was the altar. But we do know that the eastern gate, and this is not easy to follow, is right here. That red square marks the dome of the Rock of Today, the big golden dome, the Muslim shrine. If you mark a line from the Muslim shrine above the eastern gate, you can clearly see it doesn't fall on the Mount of Olives. It falls about half a mile to the north. I'll say it once again. If we assume that where the Golden Dome stands today is indeed the temple's location, we do know the location of the eastern gate, and you mark a line, you're hoping to fall on Mount of Olives because that's where the altar was for the red heifer. You can clearly see that by that theory, the Dome of the Rock, the Golden Dome, could not be on the location of the temple. Fair enough so far? Let's make it more complicated. On the northern side of the red square, there is another place on top of Temple Mount where the bedrock is not covered by the man-made platform. They left it like that on purpose, which is absolutely leveled. Let me remind you, David purchased a threshing floor. A threshing floor needs to be absolutely leveled. The rock inside the Golden Dome is very rugged. And from that stone, if you mark a line from here to the eastern gate, lo and behold, it does fall on the Mount of Olives. Is it possible, therefore, that the temple stood on a location which is about 300 feet north to the Golden Dome? Because today, most scholars would agree that the Muslim shrine is covering under it the ruins of the temple, not by that theory. So yes, we know Temple Mount, we know the area, it's a big mountain. Where exactly on top? Well, it's either one or the other. And if you wonder, how come you don't know? This is so crucial. And many people who are not supporting, let's say, the Jewish case in Jerusalem will use that as an excuse. So listen, the temple wasn't even there. Is there a way to prove that? Yes, there is a way to prove that. The people that returned from Babylon to rebuild the second temple were still alive when Solomon's temple was built. They knew the location. You cannot change location. It's a given spot. And therefore, there's a continuous documentation of where was the temple standing. But after the second one was destroyed by the Romans, the mountain was covered with a pile of stones. Jews could not access it at all. The location was forgotten. So someplace on top of Temple Mount, where exactly, we can't really tell. And now we're going to make our way to the Western Wall, and just to demonstrate why the Western Wall is so important, here is the temple building. That will be the back wall of the Holy of Holies, and the western retaining wall is the closest one to the Holy of Holies. That's the only reason why people go to the western wall to practice and not to any other wall.
The Western Wall, which is behind me, is the holiest place for the Jewish people. It is not the wall of the temple, as some people think by mistake. It's a western retaining wall of Temple Mount. Over years, whatever was accessible for the Jewish people to come and practice, they would go. It wasn't always the Western Wall. Sometimes people had more flexibility to go to other walls, but the idea was to come as close as possible to the temple's location and to worship the God of Israel. Today, when the city is in Jewish hands, basically the state of Israel is sovereign still. On top of Temple Mount, nobody else is permitted to practice any kind of religious manifestations except for the Muslims. So the Western Wall is indeed the closest place you can come today to the Holy of Holies, and that will be the aspiration of every Jewish individual and the Jewish people as a nation. And therefore, this will be a place which is not only for private prayer. Some of the big national events will take place also at the big plaza, just by the Western Wall. And this is exactly where the two aspects of being Jewish, nation and religion, will come together.
Well, I told you yesterday that in order to understand the country, you need to visit 3 locations and understand the message behind. We started with Masada, that was emphasizing the national sovereignty, and the Western Wall is adding another layer, the religious one. You don't have to be a practicing Jew to appreciate how important is the Western Wall as a symbol. And it's just a wall. There are no gold, there are no diamonds in it. We speak about the focal point of all the yearning and all the longing of the Jewish people everywhere on the planet. Today, you start hearing voices among Israeli decision makers and politicians. The Western Wall is a place of humiliation. We are settling for second best. We should go back to Temple Mount. When you're using that kind of language, you do understand it's such a delicate situation that each time somebody says that the Jews should take Temple Mount, the whole world could be in flames, as it happened in the past already. So with this optimistic spirit, I'm going to bring that session to conclusion. And yes, I owe you 2.5 minutes from the day before yesterday, 5 now, sir. I'll try to pay my debts. Please come back in 10 minutes, all right? That will be 7:45. And we're going to bring this whole virtual tour to conclusion by visiting the new city of Jerusalem. Thank you. Okay, folks. Since this is the last day of the tour, you have a plane to catch to go back home. You don't want to miss your plane. Well, the 8th day of the tour, again, just a suggested idea for these itineraries. You've done all of your shoppings, and you start missing your friends, and you miss your pet, as people tell me. I would stay for a little longer, but I really miss my dog. I understand that. And you're just craving a juicy steak because we don't do that much red meat over in Israel. We do a lot of chicken, a lot of falafel. And again, we come to the last day of the tour, and sometimes people are so excited about going back home that it's hard to get their attention, which is understandable. Well, you're here, but you're not excited about that part of the tour. So I hope to get your attention for the last day. That will be dedicated, most of it, to the new city of Jerusalem, the capital of the nation. This is just an illustration how the new center is going to look like. Jerusalem is a city that doesn't have that much commerce in it. It doesn't have that much industry in it. And the government really wanted to change that and to attract more businesses to the city. So they're going to offer tax benefits because almost everything in Israel is centered in Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is the business center. Tel Aviv is the cultural center. It is true that the government sits in Jerusalem, but Tel Aviv gets most of the money and the attention. So now there is a whole approach to try to attract more businesses to the city by building a new business center on Highway 1, the road to Tel Aviv. And we'll see, maybe that's going to work. It will be hard to tell. So we're going to dedicate some time to speak about Jerusalem of today, the capital of the nation. We're going to see some of the national institutions. We'll go to the Israel Museum. We say a word about the parliament, the Knesset. Israel is a parliamentary democracy. And again, not without any problems, and we have a lot of issues in our system, which is different than it is in America. But all things considered, it's working. But you know what? Did I say something wrong here? Hey, listen. I understand. And in the case of the Jewish people, well, our national sport is debating. And therefore, we argue about everything. You know what they say, wherever you find two Jews, you'll find three opinions. And basically, that's how politics works as well. 17 different parties are making the House today, and 8 parties make the coalition. You understand that functioning under those circumstances is not easy. You need to have a lot of goodwill to make it happen. And again, we're just dealing with some of the issues, still looking for the best system for us. Because keep in mind, the founding fathers did not come from democracies. They did not have a clue what democracy is all about, and to make a decision, we want to be one, that involves a lot of education, etc. So I'll touch on that a little later on. So that's the plan for today. Let's have a short introduction to the modern city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem today is quite a large town. It covers about 30,000 acres in size and numbers close to about 1 million people. However, only about a century and a half ago, nobody lived outside the walls of the old city. I know it may be confusing, but the old city covers 1% only from the city's territory, so Jerusalem is 100 times bigger than what we call the old city of Jerusalem. During the 19th century, as the Ottoman Empire that dominated this part of the world was getting weaker and weaker, European Christian superpowers showed more interest in what happened in Palestine, and especially in Jerusalem. The whole diplomacy of the 19th century was to keep the Ottoman Empire intact, because the Ottomans were holding the border with Russia, and all of Europe was terrified that Russia would get down to the Mediterranean Sea to be a key player in the Mediterranean area. So that's what typified the whole 19th century. The Christian European powers tried to get closer to Palestine, to have more possessions in Palestine. They wanted to keep the Ottoman Empire in a weak position, but intact, and they wanted to have more influence within Ottoman territory. And the reason for that was, of course, religious. But it wasn't just religious, it was more using religion as an excuse to gain more political power and to have more possessions in Ottoman territory. Jerusalem will be the focal point to all of the investments and the construction and the interest that the Europeans showed. The Jews are part of it as well. Since the British came to town and the French came to town, and the Russians, and Austro-Hungary, and the Spaniards, and the Italians, and each one was buying property outside the city, so did the Jews. And the neighborhood that you see behind me was the first one that was built by Jewish money. The land was purchased in 1857, and the first community was built a few years later. It's amazing to think that until about a century and a half ago, nobody lived outside the walls of the old city. It's amazing to think that Jerusalem was a small place, totally insignificant. Nobody cared about the city. Even the Ottomans, Turkey, Muslims couldn't care less about what happened in Jerusalem. But now when they wanted investments and Europeans were willing to invest in Palestine and Jerusalem, the Europeans demanded that the Ottomans are going to show some interest. You need to pave roads. You need to guarantee safety and security. You need to improve the conditions, otherwise we're not going to invest. And since the Ottomans needed the money, that will be the turning point in the city's history. And true that many of those superpowers tried to gain political power in the dismantling Ottoman Empire, and the way to do that was by using the religious factor. And therefore you come in behalf of religion, and you try to get more possessions and more property from the Ottomans, because it was just a matter of time before the Ottoman Empire will collapse. And everybody wanted to have more property in this area. Jerusalem was influenced by that in a positive way. Suddenly the city is a center of attention like never before. So we do see the turning point. People move outside the walls, new neighborhoods are built, new roads are paved, conditions are improving, and the city begins to grow. And that's what started the new era in Jerusalem's history until 1857. Not a single building was built outside the walls of the old city. So just some data about Jerusalem of today. It was indeed a divided city until 1967. The east part of town was in Jordanian hands. That's how the War of 1948 ended. The two parties simply sat to the table, they took a map, and they marked the line of the armistice, and the city ended up to be a divided city. West Jerusalem was proclaimed by the Israeli government as the capital of the state of Israel. East Jerusalem was not a capital of Jordan, it was just a city in Jordan. But the city was now divided. In 1967, after the Six-Day War was over, Israel was able to liberate the east part of town and reunite the city. And therefore, today we will make a statement in Israel that Jerusalem is a united city, the capital of Israel, never to be divided again. We are pointing at something that is more like, I can't say wishful thinking, but not everybody in the world is holding that opinion, not even in Israel itself. There's a lot of controversy. Do we need maybe to make some concessions? Because if we are willing to divide the city, it may bring peace to the region, which is absolute nonsense, if I may add, as we know. But you need to understand there is no consensus, not even among Israelis, about what should be the future of Jerusalem. Most people are in the opinion that the city should not be divided again, but there are some others that have different opinions, hoping that by giving up part of the city, it will draw our enemies basically closer, and that will lead to peace in the region. I wish it was such an easy decision to make. The city was proclaimed capital in December 13 of 1949, not right after the proclamation of the state. Because some people had the idea that since we are going to create something new, the state of Israel is indeed from Jewish roots, but we don't want to follow our ancestors' way of life in Europe in exile as people under the influence of others. We want to go back to our biblical roots. We want to be an independent nation. We want to have something new. And Jerusalem is so ancient. It's so kind of poor-looking. We should go for Tel Aviv, because Tel Aviv is really representing the spirit of Zionism. So even to choose the capital involves some controversy. It was obvious. It has to be Jerusalem, because all the longings and all the yearnings and all the promises are focusing on one city, that's Jerusalem. So in December 13th, officially, the state decided that Jerusalem will be indeed the capital. And again, if you just want to go over the information over there, we speak about that recognition that was made by the USFA moving the embassy to Jerusalem. It became to be a must visit. Every group that comes to the country has to go by the American embassy, just has to. It makes the local security, they freak out. They don't like that many people show up outside the building, not understanding what's the attraction. It's just a building. Well, there is a lot of attraction because of the political statement. And today I need to tell you that we have another embassy in Jerusalem, Paraguay, and this is it. But some nations did officially recognize Jerusalem as capital, promising to move the embassy after COVID, all right? So we have BC, we have AC now after COVID. Australia, the Czech Republic, Romania, and some of the others. Don't take it for granted. This is a very important move that some nations around the world are willing to consider and to agree that Jerusalem should not be divided. It is indeed the capital of the Jewish people, never to be divided again. Some pictures from Jerusalem, just to give you an idea about how the town looks like. It's hard to tell, but every house in the city is faced by the local Jerusalem stone, which is a white, tough limestone called dolomite. It's part of the building code. In 1926, back then, the governor of Jerusalem under the British mandate, Ronald Storrs, was the one that basically made the new law. Every house in Jerusalem should be faced by the Jerusalem stone. It gives the city a very unique look, especially after the first rainy day, when the rain washes all the dust from the walls. A long summer, the city has kind of a sparkling look. You know the term Jerusalem of gold, when the sun is setting after the first rains. And the walls are so clean, the city is really covered almost like with gold powder. It's one of those nice phenomena to see. So the building code has part of it. Everything in Jerusalem is covered by the Jerusalem stone. It's made of concrete, but the facing is the local stone. So that's how Ben Yehuda Street, which is downtown West Jerusalem, looks like. Just to give you some idea, this is the most expensive part of town. It's called David's Village, not City of David, David's Village. And property here can be easy, more than $2 million. Not everybody has that amount of money. Some people do, especially wealthy American and Canadian Jews that own most of the property in this part of town. And that's a new skyline. Jerusalem today goes through a very important kind of a revolution. High rises everywhere. The building code used to be that you cannot build a house that will stick more than 6 stories above the skyline. So when you saw the city from a distance, you saw the mountains and you do not see all these spires. Today, it's 30 stories. So the landscape is going to change totally. The population grows. It's part of the political controversy. It's all about demographics. Out of 1 million people, 60% are Jews, 40% are Arabs. Out of the 60% Jews, 50% of these are ultra-Orthodox Jews. And the amazing part is that ultra-Orthodox Jews do not believe in the right of Israel to exist as a democracy. They do not believe that Jerusalem should be a capital of an entity they do not believe in. And if you confront them asking the question, how can that be? We understand that Arabs are not pro-Jerusalem. That's understandable. But why Jews will hold to such opinion? Well, they will say that the regathering of the nation, as the Bible tells us, should happen over a blink of a second, peacefully, without any bloodshed, without any wars, and to bring peace to the region. And ever since the state was born, they would claim, there was no peace in Jerusalem that could not be God's will. And therefore, some will say that the state of Israel will be the highest sin that the Jews ever committed against God. I know it sounds crazy, but not easy to understand this kind of mindset. But in our capital, more than 60% of the people, Arabs plus ultra-Orthodox Jews, believe that Jerusalem should not even exist as a capital of the state of Israel. I know it's strange, I'm just giving you the facts, and I know it's not easy to understand. So the issue is demographics, the issue is sentiments, the issue is Israel the entity the Bible speaks about, yes or no? And different people have different approaches among the Jewish people, which is really weird to try to understand. The main institution in the city which is connected to our story will be the Israel Museum. It was rated as one of the top 10 museums in the world. I'll show you some of the treasures in it, but it also has what I showed you already, the big scale model of the city that we saw in some other parts and days of the tour.
One of the big challenges for anybody who comes to visit Jerusalem or any other place for that matter is how can you really figure out how did the place look like 21 centuries ago when what you see around you is the 21st century? Well, the model that you see down below is supposed to solve the problem. It was an attempt that was made by an Israeli scholar by the name of Michael Avi Yonah in the early 60s to try to build a model of Jerusalem in the last days of the Second Temple, which means 66 AD, the year that the big war against Rome started. Well, the question is, what were the sources of information he was using? That was before the excavations in Jerusalem started, and therefore Professor Avi Yonah was using the book of Josephus Flavius. In his book, Jewish Antiquities, Josephus dedicates a few pages to describe the city. And based on what he wrote, Avi Yonah built the model. However, right after the model was officially dedicated in 1968, excavations started in Jerusalem that were just liberated by the Israeli army, which means that everything that was found in the dig and did not fit the description, they came to correct it. So this is an ongoing, updating model, and this is the best idea that anybody can have today of Jerusalem of 66 AD. You need to understand, we speak about a city 30 years after the days of Jesus. So for those of you that want to see Jerusalem from the days of Jesus, few things were added to this city that were not there when Jesus had his ministry in Jerusalem.
We did mention that a couple of times, and just to point at that, because we'll try to answer once again about the location of Mount Calvary. I showed you that walking the way of the cross. Let me try to point at some places here on this model. Keep in mind, this wall was not built yet in the days of Jesus. I did mention that very clearly yesterday. The wall that encompassed a large area was only built later on. And therefore, the wall of reference that we should follow will be the one which is over here. That was the city wall, which means that every place outside this wall, which is by a main gate, a main road, a small hill, would qualify to be Mount Calvary. So once again, try to ignore this wall, otherwise you'll miss the point. It is impossible that the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea was within the walls of the city. This wall was not built yet. We speak about this one. So let me try to point at those locations and see if you can follow. Come on.
When you read the Gospels and you try to come to some definite conclusion about the location of Mount Calvary and Golgotha, well, that will not be easy because the Bible doesn't give us any directions. Which way was Jesus walking with the cross? And therefore, we need to rely on some information from the Jewish world, from the Roman traditions. For example, we have to agree that the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea had to be outside the walls of the city. Keep in mind, the wall that you see in front of you was not built yet in the days of Jesus, which means the city wall of reference is the one further inside. The second thing that we need to know is the Roman idea behind crucifixion. If you want to crucify anybody, you want to make it as public as possible. You want people to see the punishment. And what will be the most public location outside the city walls? The main gate, the main road. So knowing that will lead us to point to two possible locations. Number one, the place where today the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is built. That will be by the main road that departed the walls of Jerusalem all the way down to Jaffa. And right outside the building, the wall, there is a little hill, which means you have an elevated area, which is by the main road, by the main gate, a possible location. But then there is another one. Because if we believe that the crucifixion took place on Mount Moriah, the hill that I'm pointing at for the church over there today is not Mount Moriah. The city is made of two hills and a deep valley cutting through. Mount Moriah is the one on the left-hand side. And therefore, lo and behold, there is another possible location. It's by the Damascus Gates area, a major road, little higher than the rest of the area, and outside the city walls. That's a place which is known for the last century and a half by the name the Garden Tomb. It is Mount Moriah. And therefore, it's either one or the other. We are speculating because we don't have the relocation. Let me make a suggestion. Take it or leave it. Is it possible? Because the Bible says that by the crucifixion place, there was a garden with a tomb. Please define by. We do not know. Is it possible that the crucifixion took place on the area of the garden tomb, but the tomb itself was where the church is, and that was the place for the resurrection? At least we need to consider that possibility. And if this is the case, you don't have to choose one from the other. But once again, since the Bible doesn't provide those details, we are speculating.
Well, that's as best as I can do to try to convince you, to try to explain what are the two possible places. A better choice, come to Jerusalem. It will be a lot easier to understand that. Let's speak about some treasures that the museum has. Of course, the Dead Sea Scrolls will be number one. And this part of the museum is called the Shrine of the Book. It has this kind of a funnel-shaped dome that looks like one of the lids that cover the jars that the scrolls were found in. At least the first 7, that's the meaning of that shape. And there is a black wall, so black and white. When you read the sectarian material of the people who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, they call themselves the children of light, and the enemy are the children of darkness. They really value the idea of baptism or immersion. For that reason, they sprinkle water on it, they water it, it doesn't grow, okay? It's just for the decoration, as you understand, and to explain that principle of water cleansing that was so important for that group that lived maybe by the Dead Sea. Well, here are the Dead Sea Scrolls, so one of them, scroll of Isaiah. The whole length of it was found, and we speak about a scroll which is about 24 feet long or 22 feet long, the whole book of Isaiah. And the only book that was found in its entirety from the Bible is the book of Isaiah. It's not divided to chapters, that will happen later on. It's not divided to verses, that will happen later on. We just have one scroll. The original one is stored someplace, and I have to say hidden. And what we have on display is a facsimile of Isaiah's scroll. It was on display for a short time. I was lucky enough to see that. But then they realized that for some reason the ink is fading very quickly. So they stored it and they replaced it with a facsimile, but the scroll is still held someplace in the museum. The holiest object for the Jewish people today is not the Western Wall, but what we call the Aleppo Codex. This is a book of the Torah, a book of the Old Testament that was written in Tiberias in the 10th century BC, and until the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, that was the most ancient manuscript that we had in Hebrew of the Word of God. The level of calligraphy, it's absolutely amazing. We speak about the special ink they were using. We know the scribe that made that, and we basically see that they were using all kinds of dots and dashes to vocalize the words. You need to understand that in the Hebrew alphabet, there are no vowels, and therefore a combination of letters can mean more than one thing. And the problem is that you may misread such a combination, and that will give you a whole different understanding of the verse, of the chapter. Let me give you one example. 2 letters in Hebrew, Aleph and Shin. Listen carefully. If you pronounce it as Esh, Ish, Isha, Ishe, fire, man, woman, sacrifice. Which is which? You don't understand the problem. Another idea is when we speak about numbers in the scriptures. There are 3 letters in Hebrew that when you read them one way, we'll speak about 1,000. When you read them in a different way, we'll speak about a champion of war. Aleph, Aluf. Which one is it? Sometimes when you read those numbers in the scriptures, you think to yourself, well, this will be very hard to understand. The Bible tells us when King Ahab went to do battle, the wall collapsed, and buried under it 27,000 people. Has to be a big wall, huh? Well, what about 27 Navy SEALs in Ahab's troops or Ahab's army? That would be a big loss to mention. So sometimes when you read those numbers, we should read them not as 1,000, but as a champion of war. And since we don't have vowels, you can easily confuse the two. It was important to develop a whole system of dots and dashes, and that was done in Tiberias, 10th century. And this is the first one that they used that system, and from that point on, there are no mistakes. We all know how to read the Word of God. Until then, you can make those mistakes quite easily. There was a need to make sure that all of us read the Bible in the same way. And by the way, there's only one version. We don't have the NIV and the New King James and the New American Standard. We don't have those translations. It's one version that all of us read in synagogues all around the world. So there's no room for mistakes or commentary, something that happens in translations. It's inevitable. So it's important for us to make sure that we all read the same thing, identical, all around the world. This book had 420 pages on it, but we only have now 284. So big parts of it were basically gone. We don't know where. And from the whole Torah, the books of Moses, we only have the last 6 chapters of Deuteronomy and the rest of the Old Testament. So some damage was done over the years, and some pages were simply taken by collectors. We know beyond any doubt that people hold those treasures in their hands and they will refuse to submit it or to give it back to the nation. It's a national treasure. So this is today, for the Jewish people, the most important object. So important it is that even UNESCO added it to the object of World Heritage and World Treasures, the Aleppo Codex. Aleppo is a town in northern Syria. We also have the stone that I mentioned to you outside the gates of Dan, having the name of David on. Some of you may recall. We visited Dan about 2 days ago. That was day number 3. The name David appears, and you see that highlighted over here. I don't want to go into too much confusion. I'll just throw it at you. If you go to 2 Samuel 19:21, the Bible says the following: Yet in another battle, Elchanan, the son of Yaare-Orgim from Bethlehem, killed Goliath. I kid you not, that's what the Bible says. Elchanan, the son of Yaare-Orgim from Bethlehem, killed Goliath. You should ask yourselves, who is this Elchanan? We know who killed Goliath. That was David, right? Well, number one, Goliath was not the name of an individual. Goliath was a position, a mercenary, a professional soldier. There was more than one Goliath. Is it possible that David killed one and this Elchanan killed another one? So we're not contradicting what the Bible says here. We try to view everything from a different perspective, which makes a lot of sense. So Goliath was not a name of this individual. It was his position, it was his social status, if you wish, a mercenary, a soldier of fortune, if you wish. And we do have those examples in the Bible. Bathsheba is not a name. Uriah is not a name. These are titles of people, officials that were holding a certain position in the kingdom's administration. All right? So David is a name which is a little unusual because Hebrew names have a certain pattern, usually end with Yah. Hezekiah, Zephaniah, Obadiah, Nehemiah, etc., etc. Or with El, Nathaniel, Ezekiel, etc. David is a little unusual, all right? And therefore, we don't know all the details, but the Bible says clearly in one battle, David killed the Philistine giant. In another battle, somebody by the name of Elchanan. I'm not making anything of it up. It's all in the scriptures. The other stone which is important, we speak about stones all the time, is the Pontius Pilate stone that was found in Caesarea. I do remind you, it was found in a staircase in the theater in a secondary use, we said. So we saw a replica in Caesarea. This is the stone, and you can very clearly read Pilatus down here, which is the name of Pontius Pilate, the governor of Judea, 26 to 36 AD. You all know the name. Outside the Knesset, outside the museum, we have the national buildings. The government quarter is over there. The Knesset, the parliament, is over there. And most of the government offices, including Prime Minister's office, Supreme Court, etc. So the government section, like the Capitol, if you wish, or the mall in Washington, D.C., is just outside the museum as well, located in one location. And let me introduce to you the emblem of the State of Israel, the candelabra or the menorah.
Yeah.
Standing outside the Knesset building by one of the landmarks in the city, and that will be the menorah. The menorah is the lampstand or the candelabra, and this is a replica of the one that used to stand in the Second Temple. We know that to be an authentic replica due to the Arch of Triumph that was made by Titus to celebrate Rome's victory over Jerusalem. In this arch, which is placed in the city of Rome, they show the Jewish prisoners carrying the treasures of the temple on their way to captivity, and the menorah is depicted very clearly. So we do know that this will be a replica of the one that stood in the temple in the days of the Second Temple. This one is a piece of art.
It's a gift that was made by the British government to the State of Israel in 1956, and it shows 29 different scenes from Jewish history, from biblical days, and through the whole history of the Jews until the regathering and the establishment of the State of Israel. It's designed in a very specific way. You do see that everything comes down to one point, one culminated point that will be basically separating two different eras. It shows all of Jewish history. It ends with the Holocaust. It comes down to the basic prayer in Judaism, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And then a new beginning, a beginning of construction, a beginning of creation, the State of Israel. So this piece is representing Jewish history and how symbolically it's placed right outside the Knesset building, which is the parliament of the State of Israel. Let me show you some of what you can find on the menorah, and we can recognize some of these things together. Here is the prophet Isaiah and the prophecy about the lamb and the lion, the lion, and the lamb. Down below, you see the Jews in Babylon weeping for the temple and longing for the temple by the rivers of Babylon. We read in Psalms 137. Here is the weeping prophet. That will be the prophet Jeremiah. Up above, Ezra the scribe reading the Torah outside the walls of Jerusalem. By the way, the founder of Judaism as a religion with specific institutions is Ezra. All right, that's a credit the Jews give to Ezra. He is the one that founded the Jewish faith or the Jewish religion, not before his days. So he reads the word of God outside the walls of Jerusalem. And maybe most famous, the Spirit or the angel of the Lord is going through the valley of dead bones. Ezekiel 37, that will be basically the symbol of the end of the exile for the Jews and the whole nation that was lying dead in the valleys, coming back to life to recreate the State of Israel. So these are just some of the 29 scenes that you find on that candelabra. It stands outside the Knesset building, and let's hear a few words about the Knesset and our political system. State of Israel was founded in 1948, and it is a parliamentary democracy, which means that the power is in the hands of the prime minister. Although the head of the state is a president, he's a key figure, but he's a symbolic figure as well. He's supposed to be above controversy and not a political player. So the prime minister will be the most significant player in the system in this country. Please keep in mind that the founding fathers of this nation did not come from great democracies. Most of them came from Eastern Europe, from Poland and Russia, and most people who live in Israel today were coming from countries that knew nothing about democracy. And therefore, to be one was a choice made by the founding fathers of the state, and all things considered, it is working. There's always crisis, there are always problems. We're not perfecting the system to what it could be, but it's working. Behind me is the Knesset building. The Knesset means the assembly, and it's named after the great Knesset that was assembled by Moses in the desert, gathering 70 elders among the tribes of Israel, and that it was the name of the main body of legislators in Israel, the 4th, 3rd century BCE, replaced by the Sanhedrin, which is the Greek term for the assembly. The Knesset has 120 members in it, and they come from different parties, and theoretically, every 4 years we have elections. That's how the system is working, only one house in the system, and behind me, therefore, is the stronghold of our democracy. The building itself was built in 1966, and this was a year before the Six-Day War. Jerusalem was a small town back then, surrounded almost 360 by the Jordanian army. And therefore, some of the government offices and some of the sessions of the parliament took place in Tel Aviv, for example. Jerusalem was not a very safe place. Only a year after this building was officially inaugurated, the Six-Day War changed everything. And of course, today there's no threat on Jerusalem, and the whole area is in Israeli hands, which made it possible to start expanding the city as well. Until 1967, Jerusalem's population was barely 150,000. Today, it's close to 1 million. So 1967 was a turning point that changed everything in the life of the nation, and of course in the life of Jerusalem as well. The Knesset building looks like a Greek parliament. That's the idea behind this whole style, to demonstrate that Israel is a democracy and to try to follow some of the Greek temples that you find in Greece until this very day. The money, by the way, was donated by the Rothschild family. So our national home was not even built by taxpayers' money. It was a donation. It was given by the Rothschilds. And as I said earlier, from 1966, the building stands. What you cannot see is that most of the offices will be on the slope of the hill behind the building. So the whole complex is much bigger. You only see the facade and the entrance to the main building. And looking inside the building, that's how it looks like. 120 members. And again, the system is a little awkward because in order to have a government and in order to have a majority in the House, you need to have 60 plus 1 members in the House. The House numbers 120 people. Never in our past, one party was able to score that much, which means that you need to form a coalition. After the elections are over, they count the votes, divide it by 120, and then you know how many votes each seat worth, and you start dividing the seats to the parties according to the number that each party basically won. The head of the largest party will be summoned by the president and will be given 45 days to try to form a government. What he does basically is start negotiating with other parties to try to draw them into his agenda and compromising some of his agenda just to create a consensus among 60 plus 1 members in order to form a government. It's not an easy procedure. It leads to lots of controversy, not very stable. And without too many details, the government we have today is maybe the weirdest government that we ever had. But that's how the system works. And, so far so good. We are not perfect in that regard, but we are better than others. Another important institution in the city will be the Holocaust Museum. I don't want to take that much time, but interestingly enough, today, January 27th, is the International Remembrance Day for the Holocaust as well. So just kind of symbolic that we're speaking about the Holocaust in Yad Vashem here in that specific day. I did add here the verse from the book of Isaiah, even in Hebrew, all right, to explain where the name comes from. Yad Vashem means in Hebrew literally a hand and a name. But when it comes together, it means basically a memorial site. Folks, in many ways, for us, it's holy ground. Maybe not in a religious way, but what was left of 6 million Jews that perished in the Holocaust is not just the museum, it's our collective memory. Please understand the role of the Holocaust in our day-to-day life. It affects the way we think, it affects the way we act. Everything we do in the country is remembering what was the situation before Jews had a country and how poorly the whole world was treating the Jews. And therefore, the outcome of the Holocaust, in a way, will be, of course, Jewish independence. Some of you may remember the name Elie Wiesel. Was an American Jewish author, survived the Holocaust, and he said that the lesson of the Holocaust must be, if somebody tells you that he's going to kill you, he will, unless you stop him first. Israel exists to stop them first. Because even today, there is a country nearby which is determined to wipe out the Jewish state, that's Iran. We take it very seriously because 70 years ago, we did not take it seriously enough. The whole world did not believe what might have happened, and look where we are today. And therefore, the state of Israel has one purpose, and that's to make sure the Jews are safe. There's one place to go that you call home. That is the state of Israel. And therefore, without understanding the role of the Holocaust in our lives, it's hard to understand the way that Israel is basically behaving as a nation, as a state. Looking at me, and not just me, my whole generation, we are the first generation of people. All of us are second generation Holocaust survivors. We're parents who are coming from Europe, in many cases leaving the whole family behind to start all over again in the state of Israel. We do speak about something which is such a big part of our character as a nation, and of course, we want to carry on that sentiment to our children as well, which is not easy to do. And therefore, we took a mission upon ourselves. State of Israel exists because of one main reason, and Yad Vashem exists because of the short memory that people have. I bet you that within 20, 30 years, after the last survivor will die, the Holocaust will be just another boring chapter in history books that nobody will care that much about. And people are denying that already. Guess to what extent they're going to do that? There will be no eyewitnesses to tell the story. We are determined as a nation. We will tell the story until everybody will have enough. We won't stop telling the story. We need it as a reminder to the world, but also a reminder to ourselves. Why are we there? And we live in a tough neighborhood. If you lose focus, if you don't have that kind of sentiment, it will be very hard to survive in a place like the Middle East. I do want to share with you a little bit, just a little bit, of a short speech, if I may, and then I'll stop it when I see that we need to move on.
Anybody who would like to understand us Israelis and to understand how we are connected to our country, to our past and present and future, has to visit and fully understand the message behind 3 sites in the country. We say Masada shall never fall again when we tell the story of a national existence. You go to the Western Wall to see a religious one, but you have to come to Yad Vashem as well to understand the reason why there must be a homeland for the Jewish people, why Jews cannot trust any nation on the planet to help them when things are getting really bad. The lesson of the Holocaust is a Jewish state. To make a statement as a human being, as a Jewish man, as an Israeli, I would say that this place called Yad Vashem is not about hatred, it's not about revenge. This place is built because of one reason, our short memory. Within 15 or 20 years or so, the last survivor of the Holocaust will pass away, and all we'll have will be chapters in boring history books to speak about the Holocaust. We exist as a nation. This country tells a story, and Yad Vashem exists to make sure that the world doesn't forget. And if the world may, not us. So this place has a value for it, which is more than just a museum. This is our story. My generation is a generation of the survivors, or sons and daughters of Holocaust survivors. It is something that we grew with. It's part of our DNA. We cannot see ourselves as people without understanding where we are coming from. And therefore, for us, it's not a museum. For us, it's holy ground. Maybe not in the religious way. Out of 6 million people that perished in the Holocaust, what was left is memories of families, but on a national scale, that would be Yad Vashem indeed.
Well, again, I don't want to go on and on to dig into that, but just to say the following. We grew up in families that we knew that something happened in the past, but mom and dad will not share the story. They will not share the story because of many reasons, and we have a National Memorial Day, and the teacher will say, well, kids, if any of your parents survive, let them come and tell the story. And I will go to my dad and say, Dad, why won't you come? And he would say, they will not understand. So you grow up in such an environment. You don't really care much about, there are girls around and sports and school and your friend. And then you grow up and you start sharing stories with your friends, and you're amazed to see that all of us have the same story. But nobody will share it with you. And it took me personally a long time to grow up, to mature, to begin to understand what was the problem. The problem was that these survivors of the Holocaust, losing everything behind, coming to Israel, were welcomed by the locals, my generation, in a shameful way. Cowards, we call them. How come you went like sheep to the slaughter? How come you did not resist? We are Israelis. We are strong. We are confident. We know how to deal with enemies. We are ashamed of them. So if you approach your parents in such a way, not fully understanding what they went through, these people refused to tell the story. And we accuse them that if you survived, maybe you bribed somebody, betrayed your family to save your own life. You don't understand. There was a major problem in the family. And then, you're getting older, you begin to understand what life really means, and you start appreciating true courage. True courage is losing everything and start all over again. But it takes time to understand that aspects of today. We are no longer a shameless people. We understand the sacrifice they made. Because without them, maybe there was no state of Israel, which is a possibility. So the whole nation had to go through some kind of what is the right term to look for, I'm not sure, but realization of what really happened. But how can you do that when they refuse to tell the story? Now the story is out there. We deal about the Holocaust all the time. Museums, movies, seminars, symposiums, everybody speaks about it because if we want, we are missing the point of existing as a nation. And therefore the place is crucial as a reminder why we are there. We do have the Hall of Remembrance, which is the central part of it. 22 names of killing fields and concentration camps down on the floor. It's hard to see, I know. And the eternal flame over there, and a little picture with ashes from Auschwitz That's what was left from 6 million Jews that perished in the Holocaust. Part of the museum is also the Children Memorial. What you see over there in front of you is 4 candles multiplied by a countless number of magnifying glasses. It looks like stars in a very dark sky. You see pictures of children, and they read names from 9 to 5 every day for the last 25 years. I cannot figure out millions. I know a stadium full of people, 100,000 people maximum. How can anybody understand the amazing number of 6 million people? Maybe 5.9, maybe 6.3, we don't even know the exact number. But 1.5 million children perished in the Holocaust, and this will be their memorial site. So when you speak about the nation today, these are the things that I'm asking you to consider when you think about the state of Israel and the way that the state conducts its affairs. It's always remembering where we are coming from. This is not going to be now an easy move from that to the next location, but the next location will be also the highlight of the whole tour to bring the whole tour to conclusion. We're going back now to the east part of town. We're going to the Garden Tomb. We are visiting now the highlight of the whole tour, and that will be the Garden Tomb. This is the place, as many Christians do believe, for the crucifixion, for the tomb, and for the resurrection. Until the last years of the 19th century, this place was unknown. There was only one place that everybody pointed at, and that will be the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But in the 1870s, General Gordon, the famous British general, was walking on the walls of the old city about half a mile away from here. And as he was looking into the north, he could see on the bedrock something that looked familiar to him. There were 3 or 4 caves over there that, with not much imagination, formed like a skull. Now, you all know that Jesus was crucified on Mount Calvary. And Calvary means in Latin, Golgotha in Aramaic, which means the place of the skull. And General Gordon was in the opinion that that's what he sees in front of him. And when he checked a little closer, he could find next to the place a tomb. And that's what the Bible tells us, speaking about the crucifixion, that by the place of the cross, there was a tomb. And there they found a water cistern and a small wine press. It all indicates human presence outside the walls of Jerusalem. And it had to be outside the walls back then as well, because no way that Joseph of Arimathea had the burial place within the walls of Jerusalem. So all scholars do agree that this place would be outside the walls. It is outside the walls today as well. But our point of reference should be the walls of the 1st century from the days of Jesus. So this was an amazing discovery. And ever since, for many Christians around the world, that will be the place for Mount Calvary, for the crucifixion, for the tomb, and the resurrection. If we go topographically, we are standing now on the highest point of Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah, which is a hillside or hilltop that's about 1.5 miles long, begins basically here and goes all the way down south through Temple Mount, all the way to the city of David. It's one hill. The geographical top of it will be indeed the area of the Garden Tomb. Now, it's amazing that there's absolutely nobody there because the place is always packed with people. And I can assure you that for everybody who comes to Jerusalem, to the city, to the country, this will be one very moving moment. Groups are guided by the local guides in the area, and then they have communion. And I have the rare opportunity and privilege to watch people from the outside and to see the way that they respond. And the level of emotions, the level of sentiments is something that always tells me that these people are not just enjoying what they see, the hearts are full with this whole experience of visiting the country, an experience that sometimes I have a hard time to relate with because this is home. I almost take it for granted. And I'm privileged to be able to see my country through your eyes tells me how important the place is, something you can easily forget when you live in a certain place to understand how special that is. So I'm blessed to be able to keep understanding the significance of my country through the eyes of people that come to visit the city and come to visit the country. Let me just show you how the inside looks like. That's how the inside of the tomb looks like. There were two spots over there basically for two people to be buried. One is here and one is here. And of course the Greek cross on the walls over there. So that's how the tomb looks in the garden tomb, which is indeed the highlight of the whole tour, which will bring us basically to the end of a virtual tour. Just to remind you, we started when we spoke about Jerusalem with this. Okay, folks, on our way to the airport, we have a flight to catch. I'm sure that you finished shopping, all of your souvenirs and trinkets, and you left some money behind in the country. We're counting on you because that's how we make a living. And I hope that you'll come back to see us once again. I know that traveling these days is not very easy. People hesitate to get on a plane for good reasons. Israel will only take in people who are fully vaccinated, which makes the challenge even bigger, but not for too long. It looks like this COVID thing will be over, God willing, really soon. And once again, we'll wait at the airport to see your smiling faces, give you a big hug, and say, welcome to Israel. So thank you for coming, and thank you for attending. I hope that you enjoyed what you saw. If I was able to convince one of you that never thought to come to Israel to be on Pastor Ken's group next time they come, it was a good reason to come and to share that with you. So thank you very much.